Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. I read an article on the Times. Actually, I didn't read the article because it was paywalled, but I asked Grok what the article said, and Grok told me what was in the article. You have to love technology because I don't want to pay the London Times about this, but there's other sites that talked about it. So I got a little bit of information. Over in the UK, there is a possibility of formalizing that if you break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, then they might be entitled to assets from that relationship. In other words, the property you acquired during that relationship could be considered joint property. Now, this blew up. People were having a lot of feelings about this. It's like my girlfriend could just take half of my stuff when she breaks up with me. Not quite. When you get into the details of it, it's people that are cohabitating for 3 years or have children together. And we have this arrangement here in the United States. So if you're not from the United States, we have a thing here called common law marriage. And it varies by state. We have 50 states. All 50 of those states have their own laws in there, and those laws can vary by state as to what a common law marriage is and what legal protections it offers and how those things end up shaking out. So it's not universal across the United States, but we do have this concept, and the idea is you have a man and a woman, they're living as husband and wife, but there's no formal marriage. They didn't go to the church and get married. There was no marriage license, and this concept, you have to think marriage licenses didn't always exist, right? So it was always informal what the marriage really was, but they live as man and wife, and maybe they call each other man and wife, but there's never been like an actual marriage license filed. What does that mean? Well, this usually comes into play in a couple of places here in the US. One of them is divorces or breakups, but a bigger one is actually inheritance, which is if you have a man and a woman living together and the man dies, who inherits that property? And it's the common law wife in a lot of states will actually inherit the property. Because even though there wasn't a formal filing of a marriage license, they lived as if they were married, and therefore the probate court will end up giving the woman that property or treating that property as if she was the wife and therefore inherited the property of the dead husband. Sometimes this can be very dramatic because a guy will live with a woman for 20 years, die, and he has kids, and the kids are like, I guess we get all the property. And it's like, nope, common law wife gets it. And it's like, what? He wasn't even married though. It's like, but in the eyes of the state, she was, because they acted as if they were married. They bought property jointly. They cohabitated. They lived together, right? They maybe formally acknowledged that they were man and wife. They call each other wife. There's a lot of things that go into common law marriage. So over here in the UK, this looks more like a formal recognition of this relationship. Now, what's interesting though, is that I think this is a point of reflection about some of the weird, I guess the weird status of our relationships here in the West. I'm going to include Europe in this because I see this pattern in Europe as well as the United States and Canada, which is people fall through these various levels of formal and informal relationships until they arrive at a settling point where both parties are comfortable and nobody wants the relationship to go further. So there's like you meet someone, or you're talking, quote, talking. There's like a talking phase now, especially with online dating. Then you are like going on dates, and then there's an exclusivity thing, and maybe you're having a sexual relationship at that point. That moves into cohabitation. That means you're living together as if you're man and wife, right? Sharing a bedroom. So the sexual relationship becomes a cohabitating relationship where you're living in the same space, sharing a house or an apartment. And then that can just stay there, or it can become marriage. And a lot of people wanted to stay there because marriage carries a lot of extra stuff legally. But my point here is that in some states, that common law marriage is valid. And this is a thing that people may find out when they break up with their long-term girlfriend, is like, I'm married and my girlfriend wants some of my property. It's like, well, because you lived as if you were man and wife, in that arrangement, property tends to be shared jointly, right? You both live in the house, you both live in the apartment, you both contribute to the upkeep, you both pay for it in some ways. Labor may not be evenly divided in a marriage where like one person is not bringing as much income, but they're doing more other kinds like domestic labor, having children. And this is based on the AI summary that I saw in the UK, is that this applies to cohabitation relationships 3 years or longer, or cohabitating relationships where there's a child involved. So in that case, you really are like living as man and wife. You're having an informal marriage, and so it's really applying to that informal marriage some of the rules of a formal marriage when it comes to property. And the entire idea of why property would be divided after divorce really has to do with symmetry. We don't need to get into all of it, but because labor is often, not divided up, you may have one party that works and one party that doesn't work, and takes care of the children. And does that mean that they don't have any right to the property that they help maintain, or they were producing children instead of generating income? Does that mean they don't get any of that? You can debate some of the outcomes with family court. Family court's a big mess. Yeah, I get that. But if you're thinking of the concept that's there, that's really what that's about. So we have it here in the US. It's a thing that's existed in a lot of states. Yeah, sometimes people are surprised to find out that in the eyes of the state, they're actually married, even though they never went to the courthouse, they never filed a marriage license or anything like that. And that's really to protect whatever party may be more vulnerable in this case. We have a lot of other family court stuff that applies to children and things like that too. So things like child support and that sort of stuff. This to me is kind of an extension of that. Child support is a division of property, right? It's just a division of property that occurs with wages rather than with property you've acquired during the relationship. But it absolutely is taking your property and giving it to the other party. I think you'd have a hard time arguing that without involving some sort of semantic loop where it's like, that's for the children and not, yes, but you're giving it to the mother who's then choosing what to do with it. And it's your property that you're giving to her. So yeah, it's a division of property, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, this has a lot of people more afraid and like, what should the response be? Is this going to tank the birth rate even more? Well, I have my doubts because I think men and women still get drawn together, but it should make people think a little bit more, I guess, soberly about what they're doing, falling through these various relationships where like, okay, well, maybe cohabitation has risks now, because the idea of cohabitation is like, we're going to see how this works and then we can bail out if it doesn't work. I've known lots of people who cohabitated and never got formally married, and there was never a good division. There was never 50-50. So there's always one person who feels like they're a little bit more vulnerable in the case of a breakup than the other. But you're going to try that out. Well, if you do it for 3 years, okay, at that point, really, you're married. So if you're cohabitating for longer than 3 years, like what is your relationship? Are you married? Are you going to get married? Like, what are you doing there? But because of this weird thing where people fall through these various levels of relationships, I think maybe it's a little bit of a good idea to soberly consider, if cohabitating is going to produce these risks, maybe I don't want to do it so casually. Maybe I don't want to casually have children with someone that I'm not willing to be married to, but I'm willing to live with. Maybe we should actually get formally married. Maybe I just need to consider that more. Maybe I need to be more cautious with what I'm doing with other people. And, that's probably going to be wise advice too. So be cautious with it, because there's going to be more legal risks going forward for some of you in the UK. Some of that stuff already exists here in the US. It's not, it varies a lot state to state, but we have a pretty robust family court here, to many people's chagrin, but it exists and we've been dealing with it, and that's what it is. But I'd love to know your thoughts on it, whether it's like family court or common law marriage, or whether you think these things, how you think these things should actually pan out, and whether they should be formally recognized or anything like that. Leave me your thoughts down below. I have my Patreon. I got sci-fi stories that aren't available on Amazon or anywhere else. Of course, you can buy my stuff on Amazon. Here's like the book roll of a bunch of stuff that's on Amazon that I've written over the years. So check it out. And I do have music, zulonline.com. You can check out the music, and I'll see you all next time. Have a great day.